So today's conversation, guys, around capacity building beyond equipment. I think, oftentimes when we talk about capacity building, at least for us historically, it's been who needs refrigerators, who needs freezers, who needs racking, and let's move from there. And we have done a lot of work over the past 6 years in getting partners access to equipment. And the challenge that arises from that is at the end of the day, we're not necessarily we're moving more, but we're not always moving enough to be able to say we're filling that gap, we're meeting that full need. And so today's conversation really is going to be around, like, how do we look at capacity building outside of traditional equipment? And what can we do within the food bank to support you, but also within you guys organizationally to say, how do we move beyond that? When we look at what was brought on by COVID, what I've seen from a lot of partners is people moved from, traditional kind of walk up environment or, your pantry is open at a certain time, moving to drive through. And I know everybody in this session is not necessarily operating a pantry, but it gives us kind of a perspective to start from. What I've also heard a lot of partners say since that is, ooh, we're going to stay with drive through because it's so much easier and the volunteers love it. And so when I hear those things, I worry about, like, what does that mean when we're talking about how do we really build our internal capacity and how do we build the support that client is looking for long term? When we move to a model that doesn't allow us client choice, we really are limiting the opportunity to look at how are we best serving the client. So when I think about capacity building from my standpoint, and it's not the right answer, it's just my thinking, I think about capacity building as what are we doing to be able to better serve that end user. So for us, that end user could be you guys as a partner, or it could be from your guys' perspective, how do we better serve that client? How do we make that client experience as robust and positive and impactful as possible? And refrigerators and freezers and shelving, that certainly helps us because it allows us to have the type of food and the variety of food that's really what that client is looking for. But how do we go beyond that? How do we make sure that what we are doing is really meeting that individual at the point in which that individual is at that time? And so when I'm just kind of curious, how many people on the call are operating food pantries?
Yes, Hope up in Susanville.
Okay. And how many of you guys moved to like a drive-through setting? And for those of you guys that moved to drive-through, how many of you guys are anticipating, or have you kind of like thought with your groups, we're going to stay drive-through. This really works for us. And you guys can unmute if you want to.
Hey, Jenny, Sarah Sanchez. We did drive through briefly during the worst part of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And then when we were able to have people come back into the lobby, we started doing in person again, and we definitely plan to stick with that.
So Sarah, when you guys made that decision, was it a pretty easy decision for you guys to make to come back to your more traditional method of serving clients?
Yes.
And are you willing to kind of talk to the group a little bit about like what were some of the reasons that you guys saw as far as why that was so important?
For us, we just know the value of client choice. And so we have always been actively working to provide more and more client choice, always thinking about how we can give them more opportunities and serve them with more dignity. And while going back to drive-through pre-packed was essential during COVID, the ability to say, hey, we can go back to the better way of doing things by providing client choice just slowly and COVID safely, it was there. So for us, it was a no-brainer.
Thank you, Sarah. Mm-hmm. Is there anybody else in the call that kind of had to make shifts or has moved to a drive-through model that's interested or has been talking about staying in that model?
Jenny, this is Eva from Community Health Alliance. Mm-hmm. We did half of a drive-through kind of. Our building is how it's set up. It didn't allow for a drive-through and where our pantry is located. But what we did is we still kept client choice. The patients would fill out the information. They would go to designated parking spots in our parking lot. And then our volunteers would fill their food requests and then go to the parking lot. So
that was the first session you signed up for. Just give me one moment.
We just got kicked out of our breakouts.
Yeah,
Right,
because I
she's-
didn't allow screen sharing for everyone else or the hosts. And then I stepped away to go to the bathroom. So I apologize. I'm going to redo that.
Okay.
Just bear with
If
me. I
you-
apologize.
And I'm going to jump in here and help her. If anyone is looking for a room that they did not get into last time, please just use the chat button to message me, and that way we'll have a record and we can put you into the right room.
Oops. All right, to all of my staff, have you been made co-hosts? I believe you all have. Please let me know if you haven't. All right, we're gonna try this one again. I very apologize. All right. Now here we go.
Okay. Little technical glitch, nothing we can't work through. Thanks for your patience, guys. Okay. Everybody okay? Sorry about that. Okay, so I think it was Eva that was sharing with us kind of what they had done to adjust their distribution at Community Health Alliance and how they still were able to incorporate client choice. Eva, can you share that a little bit more with the group about how you were able to keep that client choice in place?
yeah, so we have a food list that patients choose what types of foods we have available depending on our pickup and availability that day. And the clients, because our model is a little bit different and we're a healthcare center, the clients at the end of their visit would fill out that the food list and then turn it into one of the volunteers. The client then was already done with all their appointments. They didn't need to be hanging out in the lobby, would help for other clients to be able to come into the lobby. So they would go to a designated parking spot in our parking lot. And then we would write down the make and the color of the car, the model of the car, so that way we knew where to find them. If for some reason that parking spot was taken, then we could easily identify who they are and then fill their food according to what they chose and then deliver it to them in the parking lot. It helped us keep that client choice because we still want, if you ask me, I would rather have green beans instead of peas. So I want to make sure that the food that we're giving out is going to be used and people know how to use it. Sometimes we get items from distribution, which is great. We love having a variety of items, but not everyone knows how to make bok choy or how to use it in a meal. And so we want to make sure that those clients that want that vegetable are able to have access to the vegetable. We were open from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. for our pantry hours, and we decreased it from 8 to noon, an hour for lunch, and then from 1 to 5. So it kind of put a damper on our 7 a.m. patients, but most of the patients would come on days that we knew that we were getting food. Even if they were here for an appointment, they would make those appointments to coincide with that.
That's awesome. Thank you. So I'm curious, how many other folks that are in this session have had to make pretty significant shifts or changes into how their food pantry is operating.
This is Charles at Hope. We have. So for a little bit of background, we started our food pantry while COVID was happening. So our first day open was the last day of May last year. So we were already putting COVID practices into place. But the adjustments that we made was that originally, since it was, May, June, it was nice weather outside. We were set up outside to receive people, to check people in. When COVID numbers went up, we made the decision. We have a nice large building, we call it the social hall, where we keep all of our food stored. We made the decision to put all of our volunteers in the social hall, have clients walk up to the doors, check in there. And then myself and typically two or maybe three other people were outside to greet people, explain the process. We use a combination of checklist and pre-packed boxes. The pre-packed boxes have about a dozen of our most popular items in there. We've been doing that for several months now, asking clients how they like that. They seem to like that combination of checklist and pre-packed. That also keeps people moving fairly quickly because, again, with COVID, it's about minimizing exposure and risk. So we're hoping that, let's say a year from now, when COVID is behind us, that we're able to have more face-to-face interaction with our clients like we did in May, June last year. We put a real emphasis on, we're not just about distributing food. We're about building up relationships and making sure people have a place where they feel safe and welcome to come. And that seems to have worked pretty well over the past year.
So I think that's a great segue, Charles. I mean, I think that that's really kind of the goal of our session today, is really talk about, like, what does it mean to go beyond handing somebody a bag of groceries? And I think it's maybe a little bit difficult to think about that because we're still pretty deep in COVID, right? I mean, vaccinations are starting, but there's still a lot of the population that hasn't been vaccinated. I think there's still a level of fear about what that interaction can look like. And I think we're still just trying to figure it out. But if we could say, we get back to the point where we're not as concerned, oh, goodness gracious. We're not as concerned about those things. What could we do to expand the work that we do beyond handing people a bag of groceries? Organizationally, the food bank has been in operation for a little over 35 years, and we've been handing out groceries through our partners and through direct service programs for 35 years. And the honest answer is we haven't ended hunger. So what do we do to really think about that capacity, or that more kind of holistic connection that we're making to individuals to help figure out how best do we serve them? So, I think a lot of times when we think about capacity building, we're talking about equipment, right? Like those tangible things, like I need a refrigerator, I need a freezer, I need shelves. But what if it was beyond those tangible things? What do we think collectively that might look like? And so when you guys are
someone accidentally canceled the breakout room, so we were going to be right back in it. Very apologetic. Okay, I'm going to do it one more time. Okay.
Sorry guys, keeping everybody on your toes. So we were saying, so like if you could think about, like, what does it mean to you when you think about capacity building beyond equipment? If you could think about your perfect situation, like what could you do to really have an impact that you're striving for with those clients? What would it mean that you would be bringing to the table? What organizationally would you want to have available to your clients, or available to you to be able to help meet that more kind of comprehensive, holistic need?
I know what we did at Sparks United Methodist Church. We increased our hours, like what was talked about before. We're also starting through our outreach a home delivery through one of the local schools, Robert Mitchell Elementary School. Our church has supported 3 elementary schools through different programs for the last few years, and Robert Mitchell used to have a pantry at his school, but doesn't anymore.
Mhm.
So we're working with them to select families, and it's just in the initial phase right now, and to start a home delivery service for them. Try and actually deliver the product to their house. They may not have a grocery list, but we'll have select items of specific basic foods that we'll bring to them.
So Wayne, like, what was your process to go through to make that determination? Because like when we talk about home delivery, I think that's something a lot of us, like, we know that need is there, but there's a hesitancy to be able to establish that because of what's involved to make home delivery sustainable. So when you guys as a team from Sparks United Methodist thought about how do we do this, what were some of the things that really kind of drove you to say, these might be challenges that we're going to face, but here's how we're going to work through that. Here's kind of how we're going to take that jump and move into that idea of doing some home delivery.
Well, we did exactly what you're talking about. We sat down as a group and said, okay, this is what we want to do. This is our goal. And how do we want to reach the people? What's the best logistics program we can do? How do we work with the food bank? We talked with Marina about it, but how do we work with the food bank to get additional food and product? So we're going to start off slow. We're just doing 5 or 6 families first. We've got a small core group of volunteers that said they will bring it to the I lost you. Can you still hear me?
Yep.
Okay. To take it to their homes. We're working through the counselor there at Robert Mitchell. She's come up with a list of 5 or 6 families, and that'll be kind of our beta test to see how it works. We hope to actually get it big enough that we can do all 3 schools that are near us: Green Bay, Florence Drake, plus Robert Mitchell. And we would pick one night a week where we would do the delivery. And like I said, that's our goal. We'll find out here in the next 2 or 3 weeks how it's going to progress.
I think that's really exciting. And I think those are the kind of things that when we kind of think back to the initial presentation this morning, when we're talking about like, what is that need really looking like long-term? Like, that's the kind of thinking I think that we have to have as a network to say, how do we go beyond what we've been doing? And it's not to minimize what we have been doing, because what we have been doing is tremendous. But how do we find ways to go beyond that to find those gaps? You know, just like what Wayne is talking about, there's 3 schools in that immediate area to Sparks United Methodist. They know there is need. So how do we kind of take a step back and sit down and figure out, how do we identify those gaps or those limitations and what's available? And then organizationally, what is required for us to do that? Does it mean it's coming back to us at the food bank saying, hey, we need more food. We need to figure out how to get 2 deliveries a week or 2 distributions a week versus 1. It might be equipment, but maybe sometimes it's not equipment. Maybe it's human capital. So are we looking at, what does our volunteer base look like? Could we have volunteers that take on this more unique role? They're not coming in to store or pack food, but instead they're doing something that looks very different. Is there that's awesome, Wayne. I didn't know that you guys were moving in that direction, and that's really exciting. And I'd really be interested in, after, a month or 2 of you guys doing that, being able to follow up with you guys to figure out, what's worked and what hasn't worked. Because I think that maybe we have an opportunity as the food bank staff to almost put together some technical assistance to help with some of these things. Like, here's what partners have experienced, and here's where things went really well, and here's where things were really kind of a struggle, so we're not kind of all recreating the wheel every time. Sarah.
We are also doing home delivery. So I wanted to do it for a long time, because we, obviously being rural, we know we have a lot of homebound folks, and we never had the time or the capacity to do it. And honestly, we had an opportunity to get a van funded through CARES Act funds through the county. And so it was like, well, it's now or never, because the whole thing is paid for. So we have spent the last, 5 months or so, like getting a vehicle, figuring out what we needed. I talked to some partners like in Southern California, or Southern Nevada, and just some other people to kind of figure out. But in a nutshell, basically we bought a van. It has a refrigerator and a freezer and shelf storage. And we'll do kind of like what Wayne was saying, where we already have like our county homemakers come and pick up orders for our joint clients. And so we'll take that off their plate, start with that small group of people, And then because we have our partnership with social services, they have started to identify people who would benefit from home delivery. So then we're going to meet with them and say, okay, what does this look like and how often? And just my plan is basically to just really use it. We're not starting it and thinking it's perfect. We're going to go in, we're going to try some things, we're going to regroup. I've got some volunteers who've done deliveries like for the library and some other things. So I'm going to get their input on the process, and then we'll really drill it down. Because one of the things I would love to do, especially in our community, is to be able to say to people, oh, your car broke down. Okay, sure. You can come, and or you can sign up for home delivery and we'll bring it out to you, and have it be available to people regardless of what the reason for not being able to come in is. But at the same time, I am nervous because I don't want to say, hey, come one, come all, we'll do home delivery. You wonder how to best prioritize people. And I don't want to leave people out just because someone says, well, I don't really think their car is broken. I don't know. Those are some of the things that I'm concerned about. But basically, we're starting slow, probably next month, and then kind of really just working together to figure out what's working and what isn't. So Wayne, I would love to pick your brain on what you guys are doing.
Yeah, I want to pick yours too.
Great.
I feel like I could jump in here. I'm with Sierra Community House up in North Tahoe, Truckee. And when COVID first hit, we moved entirely to home delivery. And then we also implemented a drive-through, but we are still delivering to about 380 families a week. So if y'all need suggestions on logistics, I mean, it's mostly volunteers is what we found. We greatly increased our number of volunteer drivers. So we have about 40 drivers a week that come and pick up the bags, and then they go deliver to different routes throughout the community. And we found that, Sarah, it was a tricky piece to we tried to transition a lot of home delivery families to our drive-through model. And then we found that those families weren't coming to drive-through. So we reached back out and they would say, well, yeah, I have a car, but my husband uses it from this time to this time. And so we put them back on home delivery. So we kind of had a little learning curve there. But another way that we've been trying to increase capacity, at least trying to address the whole family, is we've brought in the last month, we've had advocates from our family support program coming to drive through. So they're talking to the families driving through and giving information about our rental assistance programs, about CalFresh, just because our hunger relief staff wasn't able to really have those in-depth conversations because we're trying to get the food distribution logistics down. So that's been really helpful to bring in staff from other programs to try to address some of those underlying causes of hunger.
And I think that's really valuable that you said that, because I think that that's one of the things when we talk about this idea of capacity building, like how do we wrap these folks around? How do we wrap services around them, right? So if they're coming looking for food assistance, or even if we're doing a home delivery of food assistance, or they're still in more of a traditional, old school, they're walking up, like what do we do to be able to identify what other services do they need? Because the honest answer is, if they're looking for food assistance, they probably have other areas in their life that they are struggling or needing assistance with, whether that is, rental assistance, or trying to figure out how to apply for SNAP, or they need Medicaid. They're looking for immigration support or assistance. And so I think that there's a lot of things that when we think about capacity, it's how do we think about that holistic person? Like as an individual, what is it that's, when you look at kind of like, how do you spend your weekend, right? Well, I got to go grocery shopping, and I had to make the doctor's appointments for the kids, and I had to get the dentist appointment done. Like when we look at all of those things, those are things that we all have to do and figure out. But when an individual is facing food insecurity and is living in poverty, the honest answer is they come from a place of like, what is important at that moment? And at that moment, what might be most important? But the honest answer is there could be 5 or 6 or 10 other things that are really needing to be wrapped around that person to help make them, help move them to the point that they are feeling more secure or sustained, or sufficient. And so that really requires collaboration, right? Like we have to look at capacity building as like, how do we build those partnerships? How do we build that collaboration so that we have those opportunities for wraparound support and services for those clients? And that becomes a little tricky because sometimes it's easier to work independently because you can just have a plan and you move it forward, right? And when we're talking about how do we start looking at collaboration, how do we look at true partnership? It becomes more difficult because your plan of attack might not be the same as this other organization's, but if the end result is the same, right? Like if it's that idea of coming to what's that common goal that we have, being able to then wrap around that support in a way that's going to work for, multiple partners, again, keeping that end user in mind, I think is what's really important. We're going to start a process this year where we're going to work with every single partner individually to start doing some assessments on kind of like where do we rank? Like, where's everybody kind of ranking on a scale when we're looking at these areas? So do you have the ability to expand your physical capacity? I'll use Sarah, for example. They opened a new building 2 years ago at this point. 2020 is hard because it just like disappeared, but I think it's been like 2 years. And so that significantly increased their physical capacity. Now, obviously not all of us have the ability to add physical space, but for those of us that might, like, are we thinking about that? If we need more space, what would it mean to be able to secure additional space? Or if we had more space, how many more people could we serve? How better could we serve the people that we're currently serving? We've been talking about it collectively, transportation. Like we are in a set location, right? And so sometimes the assumption is, well, if they need it bad enough, they're going to come to us. They're going to find a way to get to us. But based on the conversations we've just been having, that's just honestly not the case. Some people just don't have the transportation or the logistics to get to the resources that they need. And so thinking about the idea of that home delivery, that transportation component, a mobile program, we have some partners who have embarked on some mobile distributions. We're going to ask everybody kind of be thinking about that. Like, how do we look at changing what that footprint of what we do looks like? Staffing and volunteer supports. I'm going to be totally honest and say a lot of our partners that operate food pantries are volunteer run. And a lot of those volunteers are retired. They're older in age. And what I've heard from a lot of partners is, I'm not seeing people step up wanting to take this on. So, I'm here for a while, but what happens when I go? What happens when I'm really ready to move on to something else? And so I think that we need to actively be thinking about as a network, as an organization, how do we make sure that we have sustainable programs in place from the standpoint of staffing and volunteers? Because the minute that we start something, if it is successful, if it's really working to meet that need that a client has, and then we can't sustain it because of a variety of reasons, that's not helping anybody in the long run. And so I think for us, really, it's collectively, how do we think about that idea of staffing and volunteer support? We're going to be talking with partners about financial security. Like, where are you at? Do you have the ability financially to keep yourself sustained at the current level of need that you're seeing? And if not, how do we move in that direction? How do we work with our development team or our grants team to help, find opportunities or resources? Not that we can be the ones that are doing that for you, but how do we have that collective conversation to say, have you thought about this? Because that financial security is really just is more critical than anything else. Because again, if we start this work, we have to have the ability to sustain it for as long as that need exists. Now, we could get, a couple years down the road and realize a lot of that home delivery need that was very immediate right now may have changed. And so then we change our programs to that. So it's not to say that once we start something, it goes indefinitely. But if we see that there's that need, how do we make sure that financially we can support that? I don't want to go completely away from equipment when we're talking about capacity building, because that still is certainly a very significant part of that. So what is the equipment that you have, and what is the equipment that you need? So, Sarah did the work to say, if we went to home delivery, we need a van. Like, there's no doubt about that. This is what we need. And so really thinking about that, if you can envision kind of what you would want to be, what's the 2.0 version of what you're currently doing. What is the equipment? What are the supplies? What are the resources that you need to get yourself to that 2.0 version? Fundraising is not something that all of our partners do, but it's something that a lot of our partners have started embarking on. And so really kind of thinking about how do we fundraise in an environment where there's a lot of us doing similar work. So how do we build a brand? How do we build a message that really
Yes.
kind of showcases who you are as that individual organization? And that's tricky. And I think that's too where, like, sitting down with our marketing team and talking about like what are some ideas that we can help share, or within your own community or within your own board. Like, how do we talk about, how do we create that brand that is us, that's going to really help people understand within your community, what is it that you do? It's kind of this balancing act, right? Because we're all part of this network. Like, we're all intertwined, and the work that we do supports one another. But there are times that we have to be able to speak specifically to what we do. And it's not to take away from what others are doing, but it's to be able to help support that work that we're doing. We're going to talk with every partner about outreach. Like, what does your outreach look like? Myself and Marina recently had a meeting with one of our partners. They've operated a pantry for a number of years, since I think 2006. But their neighborhood, their community has drastically changed as far as who's residing there. And so they're really trying to figure out, how do we connect? How do we outreach? How do we touch the people that are new into this neighborhood? How do we kind of keep at the forefront of what that need looks like? And so really thinking about, like, what does an outreach plan look like? I think for a lot of us, we have never really had to think about an outreach plan. The program is there, and people that need it come to us. But when we're talking about, 40% of the people that we saw come through programs in 2020 were brand new. They don't necessarily know how to find the resources. They don't know necessarily what's required to qualify for a resource, or how do they get connected to that. And so the idea of really thinking about, what could an outreach plan look like? And that really kind of goes hand in hand with that idea of fundraising, right? Like, how do we build our brand? How do we identify who we are? And if we do that, what does that do to get us to that kind of 2.0 version of what we want to be? Advocacy is something that, we work on every day. I mean, Shane Piccinini, you guys will get emails from me that are forwarded from Shane, asking for help and support around advocacy. It's something that we take a very active role in, but that could be something where if you're thinking organizationally, I want to be more involved in that. I want to have a more active role in what goes on, locally in my community, or statewide, or even federally at that level. Those are things where we want to figure out, how do we get connected with you in that deeper way around advocacy? Because at the end of the day, a lot of what we do is dictated by policy that's in place at a federal level or a state level. And so if we have the ability as a network to impact what happens at a state level or a federal level, it directly impacts what our clients benefit from, either negatively or positively. And so advocacy can be a really fantastic tool for us to kind of add to our tool belt to really impact the experience that a client has. And advocacy is kind of overwhelming, very honestly. And so sometimes thinking like, well, how do I jump into advocacy on my own? And so that's where we want to have those conversations. It doesn't have to be on your own. It could be in partnership with us to be able to kind of move some of that work forward. When you're thinking about capacity, is there data or IT needs that you have that would really help move you to where you need to be? We've been using Oasis Insights for a number of years through Mobile Harvest, and we've been recently kind of rolling it out to a handful of partners. We've had partners that have been using it for the RX Pantry project, but now we have some new partners coming on. We're really happy with Oasis, and so, but it's not to say that everybody uses that. It's like, what is that tech piece that you would need to help make that experience for your clients that much better or that much easier? And so some of these things would be kind of maybe long-term projects, not something that happens in a year, but maybe it's something that happens in 5 years. Maybe we're setting some strategic plans, some goals around what do we want to look like in 2 years, 4 years, 6 years down the road. And that really leads into planning. Like right now we have a network, you guys are a network of about 150 partners. And so we have 150 partners that work with us and partner with us on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And we still have these gaps in food assistance. So what do we do? What do we do collectively to look at? How do we plan to address those gaps as a network? And I think, again, it's difficult because we have to find this balance, right? Like, here's who we are, and not getting lost in what the network does, but then sometimes we're stronger together. So when we think about planning, what does that planning look like if we were to take on a neighborhood or a community or a county and just like focus all of it, as much effort as we could in a variety of different ways to address that community or that county? What could be accomplished? And so I think we have to be willing to kind of, in some circumstances, not worry about credit as much as worrying about outcome. And so when we talk about planning, I'll use Mineral County as an example. So I know we have some California partners on the call, but Mineral County is a county in Nevada that the primary community is Hawthorne. The food insecurity rate in Mineral County is extremely high, one of the highest in our entire states. And the poverty rate is quite high. The unemployment rate is high. The child food insecurity rate is high. But at the end of the day, Mineral County itself, it's not a huge county. It's a relatively small county. So what could we do collectively to say, we're going to focus all of this energy, this effort, this work to address meeting that meal gap in Mineral County? Because if we can do it in one place, then we figure out, how do we scale it? How do we replicate it? How do we move it into a bigger way? So again, this is not something that we do in a month. This is not something we do in a year. But if we're willing to have some of those honest conversations about how do we move this work forward and what does it look like in 5 years, that's something that could be really kind of attainable and have major impact when we're talking about building the capacity of our neighbors and our community members. I think networking is super important. Again, when we talk about not always worrying about credit for what's done, but rather worrying about the outcome, networking has a lot to do with that. And so making sure that we can build out more opportunities, even if it's more like, how do we do, quarterly Zoom meetings with every partner that's in a county? Like, that could be a really great way to start kind of building that networking, building those opportunities. And that happens, we could initiate it, but it really is only effective if the partners in that county or that community or that neighborhood are actively engaged in the work. But those are the things that we want to be able to talk with you guys about when we're going through this assessment, is what could advanced or deeper networking look like? How do we talk about the distribution processes that we have? Both, like, how do we distribute to you, and then how do you distribute to the client? So we're kind of looking at from the logistics standpoint, what could be different to allow us to move some of these other things that we've talked about? How do we move some of that forward? Is it you need more deliveries, or there needs to be more PLD options, or you need a distribution that's just produce or perishables? Like, those are the things that we need to be thinking about, like, from that distribution standpoint. How do we change? But then if we're going to make that change, what does that allow you to do from a distribution standpoint to address that client need? Client choice is in here because for us, that's the key to a lot of this, is making sure that when a client comes and looks for food assistance, regardless of who the partner is, or if it's one of our direct service programs, that we are keeping that client choice component in mind. It's critically important. I think what's also important is client choice can look very different. So it's not to say everybody has to be able to walk through a pantry, but how do we keep that idea of client choice in the forefront when we're talking about how do we move our work to that next level? And then, what does that food bank involvement look like? Are we doing this? How do we kind of deepen this relationship or this partnership to be able to move this work forward? Sometimes I think it can feel more transactional, right? You placed the order, you got the order, you submitted your report, we move to the next month. How do we take that idea of transactional and move towards transformational? How do we, and it's not going to happen across the board, right? Like, some partners are going to be very content with, this is where I am and I'm happy to be there. But for those partners that are saying, actually, I envision this being different. I envision this being deeper. How do we figure out how to do that? How do we move from that idea, for those that are ready, of transaction to transformation? So we talked about this a little bit this morning, but when we look at like 2019, we had the lowest food insecurity rate that we've had in 20 years. But even with that, we had 35 million people in our country that were food insecure, and 11 million of those were kids. So when the country is the strongest from a financial standpoint, I would say, not a lot else, but when the country is strong from a financial standpoint, and we still have 35 million people looking for food, I think that we have a social responsibility to figure out how do we work to address that beyond what we've been doing. Because I mean, I would say probably most of the people that are on this call, they have been partners with us for a long time, sometimes, some fewer than others, but we have actively been doing this work for a really long time. And yet we still have 35 million people in our country that don't know where their next meal is coming from. And so I think if we look back at the previous slide, like figure out how do we take all of those different areas of the work that we do and figure out how do we move it forward. When we look at 2021, it's projected that 42 million people will experience food insecurity. So we've gone from 35 million to 42 million, and it includes 13 million children. So again, I think we have that responsibility to figure out what do we do to really start moving the needle in a deeper, more intentional way in some instances. We've showed this morning, so I'm not going to show it again because we're getting short on time. But here's what I believe. Like, I honestly believe this. 2020 was the most difficult thing that I've ever experienced in my 13 years at the food bank, trying to figure out what do we do, like how, and every time we had a plan, something changed and we had to shift, right? So I think if we could get through 2020 and do what we did, which was honestly amazing to me, if we go back to the morning slides, almost 4 million additional pounds of food made it out to the community. If we could do that in 2020 with all of these challenges and barriers and difficulties that we had to work through, we honestly can do just about anything. So when we think about what do we want 2021, 2022, 2025 to look like, we have it in us to figure out what that means. It's being willing to kind of take that next step and jump into something that's maybe a little bit unknown and figure out how do we do it. So, these are all things that we've kind of been talking about, but this is stuff that kind of tends to be like, this is what we do. And it's just easier sometimes to continue doing what we do because we know it, it's familiar, it's comfortable. But as we start to think about how do we move to that next version of ourselves, these are the things that in my mind that we should be thinking about. And you guys may have different things as well, but are my days and times and distributions set in a way that actually supports the client? If we have a lot of working families, but we're not open in the evenings or during the weekends, is that supporting those working families? Is my pantry where it needs to be in order for people to be able to come to me? Or am I thinking about how do I move that to a mobile setting? Can I be open more often? If I'm offering client choice, can I deepen what that client choice looks like? If I'm not doing it, what's stopping me? Like for those on the call that really have still not kind of gotten on board with client choice, what's keeping you from doing that? And if it's things like, well, it's more work or the volunteers don't want to do it, well, then that's where we got to take a step back and say, is that really a good answer? Or is there something deeper we can look at? Really asking, like, and maybe it's engaging the clients, like, how can I serve you better? You're coming to me, we have a relationship, you're comfortable here, but what could we do to better serve you, to be able to meet your needs more holistically? How do we think about offering those wraparound services? So are people able to get connected to SNAP benefits when they're coming to your pantry, or Medicaid, or do they get recipes? Is there non-food product available for there? Do they get access to produce? Do they get access to commodities that they're entitled to? Do they understand how to use the food that they're getting from the pantry? So all of these things, I think for a lot of us, they're things that we know and they're things that we're aware of, but how do we make sure that we are actively making that a part of the work that we do? Thinking about volunteers, like, are my volunteers trained in a way to support what my vision is for the work that I do? And volunteers are amazing, but volunteers can also be a little bit tricky because they have kind of their own vision, their own idea about how that work should get done. And so being able to find that middle ground between what you as kind of the leader, the visionary, the director of your work kind of sees as what this needs to be, and being able to find the volunteers are going to really help support and drive that work. And sometimes it's just a matter of training. It's just a matter of being able to kind of expose them to what that vision looks like. You know, kind of working through, making sure that we're working through our preconceived ideas about what need is and who is entitled to resources, who actually needs those resources. I think what Sarah said was really valid. You know, just because someone, it is our place to question why someone can't get to a distribution. At the end of the day, if they can't get there, they can't get there. So how do we make sure that we're kind of removing our preconceived ideas, our bias away from the decision-making process around, again, how do we move towards better supporting the end user, those client needs? When you're looking at the food that you make available, do we have culturally appropriate foods available in our pantry? So if you're a pantry that serves a larger Hispanic population, or you are working to serve a Native American population, are we trying to find ways? And this is something where, again, like we would need to work collectively. Like this is where we would want to be involved in those conversations. But how do we make sure that we have food in that environment that's really going to support the needs of that individual? Because at the end of the day, if we're concerned about what that end user, what that client is needing, we need to be thinking about from a cultural perspective, what is it that they need? If they're, you know, if what they really want is access to more fruits and vegetables, because that's what kind of has supported them culturally, then how do we make sure that that happens? Also thinking about like, how do you make sure that your volunteers are a representation, or your board is a representation of the clients that you serve? You know, so this goes back to this idea around equity and inclusion. And are we building out our programming in an effort to reflect who it is that we are wanting to support and assist through the work that we do? And then taking an honest step back and saying, what's not being met? And sometimes I think that's difficult for us to do because we know how much we are doing, right? So it's one thing that you're like, look at everything that I accomplished. How could there be this unmet need? But at the end of the day, there is. And so not taking it as I'm not doing enough, but rather, how do I still identify, like, where are those gaps? Where are those unmet needs? And we're not going to be able to meet all of those, but is there some of those that we think we could work towards addressing? So I think we've talked a lot about client choice. I'm going to skip this, but it will be, you guys will have access to it. But I do want to share this one because I think that this is where, when we talk about client choice, it's important to think about, like, client choice can be kind of on this continuum. So it doesn't have to be that they're walking through your pantry. And, you know, Eva gave a great example of that, like what they're doing through Community Health Alliance to be able to still build in that choice component. But really, when we think about choice, it's how can you design the work, or how can you design it throughout different programs to still make sure that clients are getting access to the things that they truly need to be able to help make them healthy and successful and sustainable, and not getting stuck in this idea of, you know, it's a cookie cutter approach. Either you have client choice or you don't have it. There's really kind of, we can think about it from a very broad kind of range of what levels of client choice can we have. And if I'm at a level 1, maybe I don't strive to get to a level 5, but maybe I figure out how do I get to a 2 or a 3. And then, you know, kind of thinking about capacity building through that lens that's not equipment. So, and this is where we would kind of come back, and you guys come back to us and say, like, well, I need technology. How can you help me figure out how to get technology to better serve my clients? I really want to do this, but I need training, and I don't know where to figure out how to find that training. So how can we help you with that? I need more food. So, you know, plain and simple, I want to do this, but I'm not getting enough food. So it's being able to have those honest conversations to say, okay, how can we help support that? And be understanding that for us too, it might have to be over time, right? Like, we can't flip a switch just like you can't flip a switch, but how do we look at how do we get more of that food in place? All of these things would be things that would kind of come from that self-assessment and that assessment that we do with you guys throughout 2021. So here's my ask of you guys, kind of this is my request. When we start reaching out to you guys to talk about these assessments, really be willing to take the time to work with us. I anticipate, we as a team, we talked about this, like I anticipate the assessment piece probably taking 12 to 18 months to be able to get through all of our partners. So in my mind, this is not immediate work. This is work that we're going to really take the time to do to make sure that collectively we're doing it right. But I think that the start really is that idea of the assessment so that we can really get a sense of where are all of us and where do we want to go. I'm going to ask everybody to like really make sure that we are actively communicating. So if you have ideas, if you have questions, if you have needs, reaching out to the team, whether even if it's before we start these assessments, if something kind of triggered with you today and you're like, yeah, I want to talk through this more, then let's start having those honest conversations about what could we do to help support what those ideas look like for you. Because for me, for those of you guys that have known me for a long time, I hope that this is evident. I mean, I've been here for 13 years. And for me, the most important and valued thing that we do here is the partnership with you guys. And so making sure that we can support that partnership to the best of our ability is key. I would ask you guys to consider surveying your clients sometime in the next, 6 to 8 months to really understand from them, what is it that they're looking at? What are they looking for? What do they need? So that when we get to the point of being able to do these self-assessments or these assessments with you guys, there already is some of this understanding from a client perspective about what did they see kind of the 2.0 version of your pantry or your program looking like. If you're a partner who has, kind of moved away from client choice because of COVID, really actively thinking, how do I re-engage with client choice on some levels? We had that kind of continuum. There's ranges of client choice. And so really I'm asking those partners that are on this session with me today, if you've kind of moved away from that and you're comfortable in that non-client choice environment, I'm asking you to kind of figure out how do we collectively work towards re-engaging on client choice. And then I would also ask you guys to have a conversation with your teams about culturally appropriate foods. How do we start talking about having those be readily available and what that would look like? And I think that starts with us talking with our teams. It also is something that comes into play when we're talking about how do we survey, what are we surveying when we're talking with the clients that we serve, and understanding what is it that they would be looking for. At the end of the day, Vinny, our director of food procurement, he works really hard to procure product, but we can't always get everything that everybody wants. But if we have, kind of a broad list that says, here are things that we think, based on conversations with clients and what we've talked to as a team or a community, here's what we think we would need, then it gives us an opportunity to start figuring out how do we source those things? How do we see if we can find and access those things at a reasonable rate? So that is me. I could talk about this forever, but honestly, we only have 2 minutes left. So that's my contact information for you guys to get a hold of me. You did have information from the morning session to be able to get a hold of Marina as well. But I hope that this is a conversation that we could talk about for hours. And so it's hard to condense it into 55 minutes. But I hope that everybody feels like this was at least a valuable start to a conversation. I really think that the assessment piece that we do over the next, 12 to 18 months is going to be really impactful for our partnership, for us, but also for you guys as partners. So I will stop talking and I will turn it over to you guys if anybody has questions, additional stuff they want to share before we move out of our breakout.
Jenny, I just want to say thank you so much for doing this session. This is great. And I look forward to talking with you and working with you and other agencies more about capacity.
Thank you, Charles. Wayne?
Jen, quick question.
Yeah.
I'm under the impression we can only pick up food once a week. Is that correct?
As it stands now, yes, but that's where I want us to have those conversations. If you feel like you're needing access to more, then we need to figure out how and if we can make that possible.
Yeah, because I think if it's decided we're going to increase capacity and it works as well as we hope, especially with delivering to the homes, we pretty much drain ourselves on the Tuesdays that we have our program. And
Okay.
we would probably need to have a different pickup of some kind. And I'm assuming we're probably not alone. Other groups might run into the same problem.
So Wayne, I'm taking note of that, and we will follow up with Marina, you and I, to be able to talk through what some other options could be.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
As Wayne mentioned, and you mentioned it earlier, Jenny, one of our concerns and issues is volunteers, meaning so many of our volunteers are retired senior citizens. And when we're able to find somebody, which means their hours are somewhat limited, especially in the wintertime. And we talk about, well, we'd love to get some young, strong people here to help move food. Well, likely they have jobs, or, if you have a family. So finding volunteers that are available and reliable, dependable, is an ongoing issue.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge for, I think, a lot of us. And I think that's where we have to sometimes be willing to think about, like, if, say, you got college students from the
Right.
college to come help, or students from the high school, does that mean that you may have to change your distribution times to accommodate some of those volunteers? And I think that's where we've got to be thinking about, like, what would need, if we had this new volume of supports, what would it mean to change the way that we're doing it? And maybe it's not a complete change. Maybe that's when you add, maybe that's what allows you to add an evening distribution or a weekend distribution, because you have that new set of volunteers. But I think I think volunteer support is one of the biggest challenges that a lot of our pantry partners have, because a lot of our pantry partners operate through faith-based groups. And they are all volunteer ran. And so really thinking about, how do we build out the sustainability of that volunteer core?
Absolutely.
I wanted to say too that I'm in Hong, and I wanted to let Charles know that one great source of help has actually been community service. Contact the county jail and ask to be on the list for community service. We've actually gotten some really good volunteers. They don't last forever, but it helps in the gap times, especially when we get deliveries and things like that. It really does help. So I would suggest maybe looking into that.
Janice, that's a great idea. Thank you.
I see a lot of you saw the message, but there's been a request to put your contact in the chat. So since that chat will be saved, so people can access that. So if you haven't done so, if you could do that.
I want to say, Jenny, that I'm sitting here the whole time you're talking, nodding and like a bobblehead, but I'm really freaking out inside, because I feel like for me, this whole conversation, like almost every single bullet point on your list, is something that I want to have conversations about. And I want to have them with you guys and with the other partners, because locally I have really great partners around here, and other directors that I chat with and stuff like that. But I feel like so much is unique to what we're doing and our cause. And sometimes just being like, I run our organization, but I have one staff member and 1 million volunteers, and sometimes not having somebody to bounce stuff off of in the way that you're talking about, it's been hard. Like, sometimes I get burnt out trying to think about capacity, and other times I get really excited about it, but then there's no one to talk to who has the same perspective or understanding or vision that I have. So I'm like, whatever you're doing, whatever this is, sign me up. I want to do all of it. I want to talk about all of it. I want to be involved in all of it, because I feel like we must have like 150 partners. That's an amazing web of people in Northern Nevada. And there's no reason why we can't join together, even on the same like understanding of a mission or a path, or like even with some of the advocacy stuff. I feel like you could mobilize 150 people really well to go to legislature and say X, Y, and Z. I feel like all those things could be just really amazing. And I think you're right. It's a long process, but this just made me like super excited.
I'm happy to
So
hear
I-
that, because I think I was a little nervous it was going to just like overwhelm people, and people were like, oh my God, what is she talking about? She's absolutely lost her mind. So I'm happy to hear that at least one person doesn't think that I'm crazy. And I think we have to just, again, we've got to be willing to be in it for the long haul, right? So we know that it's the kind of work that takes time, but I think there would be a lot of value into having, smaller groups, networking groups. We've all become so familiar with Zoom, like to be able to do this, once a quarter and to do check-ins with specific topics. I think it would be valuable. And I think there's also value in looking at it from county perspectives, but I also think it'd be helpful to look at it across those lines, right? Because what somebody has done in one community, you may not even have thought of, and it could work in your community. So I think for us, it's trying to figure out how do we do that in a way that's still kind of content heavy enough, but then also enough information, enough kind of time that there's not content to kind of work through process.
To echo what Sarah was just saying, I would encourage you to consider doing a monthly Zoom meeting. There are so many items on your checklist that I think we could divide that up over a year's time and say, okay, well, here's the topic for May, here's the topic for June, and have it available to, and I think, yeah, specialized networking groups would be great, but having a time when all the agencies, and realistically, if you had 10% participation, I think that'd probably be pretty good. On a given month. But for those of us who do want this kind of connection with each other, being able to get together once a month, chat for an hour, here's what I'm seeing. Are you seeing the same thing? Here's how I solve this problem. If I'm understanding you correctly, Sarah, I would love something like that.
Okay, I'm noting that down. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I'd be willing to make a massive commitment. I feel like, and I apologize if I'm talking over anybody, but so Jenny, for us, I'm like, okay, I need somebody to run our warehouse. If I get someone to run our warehouse, which is a new staff person, which is really scary for us, Denise can focus on programs, and I could focus on that long list of stuff that you had. That conversation I just had last month. So I'm in the process of trying to figure out how do I make all that happen. But in the meantime, that whole list that you have is basically where I'm like, I don't even
where do you start?
Yes, yeah. But for me then, even being able to go to my board and say, if we hire this new staff person and we do X, Y, and Z, look at where we're going to go with all of this over the future. I think they would automatically be like, oh my God, great, so many possibilities. Because we often feel like we're at the end of that river, right? We're doing the same thing, handing food. And we have a partnership with social services. So I know all of our clients are getting the case management that we wish they could have. If you're hungry, then you may not be able to pay your bills or whatever those situations are. So in some ways, I feel like at least we've got that component, but all this other stuff, I want to roll it all in.
Thank you, Sarah. That helps me a lot. Guys, is there anybody else that wants to share?
I just want to say that I echo everybody else. I mean, it's great to get together and gather all the information. And there's always new ideas that pop into your head as you're listening to everybody else talk. Everybody else is, there's just a little bit of a different nuance to everybody's organization. And so to nitpick little pieces from everybody's little ideas and go, oh, I can do that. Let me try that. I think it's really great. So I agree that, if we could meet more often, if those of us that can, I think it's a great idea.
And I think I agree. And I think that that's the important part of this, is that this doesn't have to be an all or nothing. So I think if somebody's feeling like, yeah, I'm ready to kind of move towards how do I move towards that 2.0 version, then that's where we start, right? And if somebody's not ready yet, then that's okay. We're not going anywhere. I don't have any plans of going anywhere. So this is a progression. We do this over a period of time to where we get everybody to the point that they want to be at, is kind of the way I look at it. And we're going to have people that jump, go from here to here. And then we're going to have people that, maybe their jump is smaller, but for them, it's still impactful in the work that they do. Okay, guys, this was awesome. So I hope that It was valuable to everybody. We're going to get booted back into the main session in a couple seconds, but thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.